Welcome aboard Rocket Ship, the platform with the most relevant content for competitive examinations. This is Rocket Ship IAS Lab, and we would continue with our discussions on general studies papers for civil service main examination. We would take up a question that you might come across in GS paper 3 of the mains. So, let us read out the question. What is microplastic pollution? What are its ill effects on human health and ecosystem? Discuss the alternatives to microplastics. This is a fairly straightforward one, and this question has three requirements actually. In the first part, you have to briefly define what is meant by microplastic pollution. You have to define microplastics themselves. Second, you have to talk about the ill effects that would form the major part of your answer and its ill effects on human health and ecosystem specifically. And in the third part, you have to suggest some of the alternatives to microplastics. So, we are introducing our answer with a piece of alarming news. The news is the scientific and healthcare communities expressed alarm on the news that Brazilian researchers had discovered microplastics in brain samples of cadavers, that is, dead bodies on which medical procedures are being done, especially medical testing, things like those. At the same time, microplastic concentration in all organs has recorded significant increase in the last decade. Now, what are microplastics? Microplastics are plastic particles less than 5 millimeter in size. That is, they are less than 5 millimeter across. They are of non-natural origin and are non-biodegradable. As is normally understood by the term plastic, the microplastics too are of non-natural origin. That is, they are artificial molecules. They are synthetic molecules, and moreover they are non-biodegradable. And these two characteristics of their non-natural origin and their becoming they are being non-biodegradable, which are the causes of most of the problems associated with microplastics. Microplastics can adversely affect the human and environment health, and in many ways. And how? In what ways the ill effects of microplastics become manifest? These are, they can interfere with bodily functions. An example that we are giving here, that they can interfere with nerve enzymes, from the just cited example of microparticles observed in the brains of cadavers. This is actually this fear was raised that microplastics can interfere with bodily functions like nerve enzymes. They can lead to biotoxicity and then oxidative stress. We are not defining oxidative stress here, but what happens due to oxidative stress, there would be DNA damage, and if DNA damage were to continue for a long time, that is DNA damage and repair, this would lead to cancers. So ultimately bioparticles are carcinogens also, that is, they can lead to cancers. Then there is the phenomenon of biomagnification, which you would probably know. This is increase in concentration of a particular molecule up the food chain. What happens in biomagnification? In the phenomenon of biomagnification, a particular molecule, its concentration increases from one trophic level to another. For example, the concentration would be, say, X in the you could say in the plants, that is the producers, but in the herbivores this concentration would be more than X, and in the carnivores who feed upon these herbivores, the concentration would be still more. This is the phenomenon of biomagnification, and microplastics actually biomagnify. Microplastics can clog stomata and gills especially in the marine environment, and thus suffocating planktons and marine biodiversity. They can also provide substrate to harmful pollutants, pathogenic microbes, etc. Now, taking up these points in detail, microplastics have been connected with many health issues in humans. They can mimic nerve hormones and enzymes and interfere with their functions. This is the mechanism of their interference with the functions of hormones and enzymes. That they can actually mimic these hormones and enzymes, and thus they actually interfere with their functions. Then they have been found in bodily fluids like semen, and adversely affect fertility. Moreover, they are implicated, that is, they are blamed for in the formation of plaques that clog arteries, which you probably know. This problem is not much relevant here, but anyway, this won't do you any harm to know about this term. This is called arteriosclerosis. So, this is the formation of fat plaque in the arteries, and this can lead to heart problems. They can cause DNA damage and ultimately cancers, as we have just discussed how DNA damage leads to cancers. Microplastics in environment exhibit biomagnification, their concentration rising from one trophic level to the next, as we have explained that their concentration would be something in the producer. For an example, in phytoplanktons their concentration would be say X part per million or whatever, but in the zooplanktons which consume these phytoplanktons, their concentration would increase. And then on the fish or like other marine organisms which feed on these zooplanktons, the concentration of microplastics would be still higher. So this is the phenomenon of biomagnification. And being non-biodegradable, they persist for a long time. They cause physical stress too, that is, they clog the pores of phytoplanktons and gills of marine life, suffocating these organisms. Now, microplastics can provide a substrate for harmful chemical molecules and pathogenic microbes. As we were just talking about, that they can the harmful chemicals can accumulate on the surfaces of microplastics, as the pathogenic microbes can form colonies on the surface of microplastic particles, and in this way they can harm the environment, the marine environment mostly. Their ill effects well recognized. There are few alternatives to microplastics. What are these alternatives? First is using natural substitutes in cosmetics, toiletries, etc. Actually, one of the pathways from which microplastics enter the you could say enter the environment or human body is through their use in cosmetics and toiletries. They are used for Microplastics are used in cosmetics and toiletries for exfoliation, scrubbing, etc. Exfoliation, scrub, etc. Sorry, it is scrub, scrub. So microplastics are used as a scrubber, exfoliator, etc. And this is one of the pathways that they enter the human body or the environment. So we are suggesting that instead of these microplastics, we should use, for an example, natural substitutes like besan and sandal powder, actually chandan powder, as exfoliators, things like those. We should actually replace these microplastics with the natural substitutes. Moreover, research and development into biodegradable polymers. Ultimately, the problem of microplastics starts with the use of plastics themselves. So instead of using plastics in the first place, we should move towards using more biodegradable polymers, and we must undertake research and development in the biodegradable polymers to ultimately replace the plastics, replace the non biodegradable plastics, which are ultimately the main sources of microplastics. Moreover, enforcement of rules like those on ban on polythene bags, packaging materials, etc. These rules must be strictly enforced. Nowadays, the ban is in place, but it's not enforced in word and spirit. But in these type of questions, actually in the questions of that have anything to do with environment, which have to do with the environmental problems, you must also add that it is mostly due to the human propensity of overconsumption. You would repeat it in the questions that ask about the environmental problems. You should mention that it is mostly due to the human propensity of over consuming that the problem generates in the first place, that the problems comes up in the first place. So we are talking of attitudinal changes, attitudinal shifts. However, the best is bringing an attitudinal shift in people. Wasteful consumption like fast fashion, often woven from synthetic fiber, should be discouraged. Actually, some of the experts have raised concern about this practice of fast fashion, that is, using your clothes for an example only once and then discarding it. And as you can well understand, most of the fast fashion products, which are mostly like available on online platforms, these fast fashion products are made from synthetic low quality, actually low quality fiber, and these synthetic fibers are a source of microplastics. So we should shift to you could again say slow fashion, that is, you should appreciate high workmanship rather than going for